The snow fell quietly that night, covering the cracked pavement and broken promises of a forgotten corner of the city. It was the kind of cold that crept through worn-out shoes, that wrapped around fingers like a warning. On the steps of the old church shelter, she saw him, curled against the stone, his coat too thin, his eyes shut tight as if sleep could keep the frost from reaching him. Most people passed him by. She didn't. Her name was June. 27, thin jacket, no umbrella. The kind of woman who carried hurt behind her eyes, but still offered warmth like it cost her nothing. She paused, hesitated, then knelt beside the man. "Sir," she whispered, touching his shoulder. "You'll freeze out here." He flinched awake. His face was sharp-boned, smeared with a day's worth of dirt and exhaustion. But his voice, when he tried to speak, was hoarse, not with time on the streets, but with something deeper. Silence. Shame. Fear. June didn't wait for answers. She helped him up. He staggered, barely able to walk, his lips cracked from cold. She led him inside the shelter. No ID, no name. Just a man with bruised knuckles and haunted eyes. They called him Michael. No one questioned more. That night, she brought him soup, a dry blanket, and something rare, eye contact that didn't flinch. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know he once sat on top of a billion-dollar empire. She didn't know someone had tried to kill him the day before. But what she gave him that night, without even realizing, was something he hadn't felt in years. A reason to stay alive. June wasn't always the type of person who would stop for a stranger. But something about losing everything makes you see pain more clearly in others. 2 years ago, she had a life that most would envy, a stable teaching job, a fiancé who smiled too perfectly, and a little apartment with cracked windows but warm memories. That was before everything collapsed. It started small. An accusation at work, a student claiming she'd pushed too hard, said something inappropriate. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. The school suspended her, pending investigation. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. Her name had already been passed around like a warning. No school would touch her resume again. Her fiancé stayed, at first. Said it would blow over. That he believed her. But when the money got tight, when she sold her engagement ring to pay the rent, his patience wore thin. He didn't shout, didn't hit, but one day, he packed and left. Said he couldn't carry her anymore. That was the phrase that stayed with her. So June carried herself. Took temp jobs. Moved into a smaller place. Started volunteering at the local shelter because being around others who had lost made her feel a little less alone. The winters in that part of the city were especially cruel. The kind of cold that made your bones ache even inside. But June knew that sometimes it wasn't the temperature that hurt the most. It was the stillness. The isolation. The feeling that if you vanished, no one would notice until the snow melted. That's why she noticed the man on the steps that night. He didn't ask for help. Didn't beg. He just sat there, letting the cold take him. That kind of stillness was familiar. She had lived there once, emotionally, at least. She didn't know who he was. But she saw the way he held himself, tight, controlled, like someone who used to wear expensive suits but now barely fit into borrowed clothes. His eyes gave it away. They weren't desperate. They were broken. She didn't ask questions. She just gave. The next morning, he hadn't run. He stayed. Helped wipe tables after breakfast, picked up chairs, said thank you softly when June passed him a cup of tea. He didn't say much. But when he looked at her, there was something behind his silence, recognition, almost. Like he saw in her the same quiet ache he carried. And for the first time in a long time, June didn't feel invisible. The storm that rolled in 3 nights later wasn't in the forecast. Bitter winds pushed snow sideways across the shelter's windows, and power flickered in and out like a breath on its last legs. Most of the staff had gone home early, but June stayed, wrapping scarves around the necks of anyone heading out and tucking extra blankets under trembling shoulders. Michael, if that was really his name, had stayed behind too. Quiet as always, helping without being asked. He moved like a man used to purpose, not passivity. She'd catch him tightening bolts on loose chairs or folding laundry with a kind of precision that hinted at another life. But he never offered more than a few words. And June, respecting that silence, never pushed. Until the glass shattered. A scream cut through the back hallway, raw, female, urgent. June dropped the soup tray she was holding. Michael was already moving. She raced after him and found the girl, barely 20, pinned against the stairwell by a man in a black coat, his grip iron strong, face hidden by shadows. June shouted. The man snarled, shoved the girl aside, and bolted toward the exit. Michael didn't hesitate. He ran. Out into the blizzard, no coat, no boots. Just instinct. June froze. For a moment, she couldn't move, not from fear, but from disbelief. She barely knew him. But what kind of man chases a threat into a storm? He returned 10 minutes later, snow-drenched, jaw bleeding from a punch he didn't dodge in time. He got away, was all he said. The girl was shaken but unharmed. Said the man had followed her from the subway station. Meant to rob her. Maybe worse. That night, June found herself sitting beside Michael in the infirmary corner, dabbing at the cut on his face with a cotton pad soaked in iodine. Her hands were gentle, her eyes focused. But her mind raced. He didn't flinch. Just sat there, watching her with a stillness that wasn't cold, it was respectful. Protective, even. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I couldn't not, he replied. She paused. That voice, low, steady, with a subtle weight to it. Not the voice of a drifter. Not someone running from failure. Someone running from something bigger. You ever work security? She asked, trying to smile. He shook his head once. Something like that. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them. There was a wall around him, carefully built and tightly held. But tonight, a crack had opened. And June, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, wanted to know what was behind it. As the shelter dimmed and the storm screamed outside, she offered him a thermos of hot cider, her hand brushing his for just a moment longer than needed. He accepted it, his gaze lingering. That was the night everything shifted. Not because of the storm. But because someone finally saw the other, fully, without question, without fear. And neither of them would be the same again. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. The city slowed to a hush, white and quiet and brittle. Power flickered. Pipes froze. Streets emptied. But the shelter pulsed with a strange warmth, one that had nothing to do with the failing heaters or canned soup. It came from the rhythm that June and Michael began to fall into, without planning, without words. She'd find him already in the kitchen some mornings, sleeves rolled up, quietly slicing bread like he'd done it 1,000 times. He never asked for instructions. He just noticed what needed doing, and did it. When a pipe burst in the laundry room, it was Michael who found the shut-off valve. When the generator failed, it was Michael who coaxed it back to life, fingers raw from cold. June watched him more now. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. He moved like someone who used to lead others. Who'd made decisions with weight. Yet here he was, folding towels beside her, nodding as she told stories about the kids at the shelter's daycare, asking just enough to let her know he was listening. He didn't talk about himself. But in small ways, his silence softened. One evening, after the others had gone to bed, she found him alone in the back corridor, staring at the old piano someone had donated years ago. It hadn't worked properly in ages, some keys stuck, others sharp and cracked. "You play?" she asked, stepping beside him. He glanced at her. Then, without a word, he sat down. Pressed a few tentative notes. It was clumsy at first, hesitant. But then a melody emerged, fragile and aching. Something classical, slow and sorrowful. June sat on the bench beside him, listening. It didn't matter that some of the notes were off. The emotion was true. When he stopped, she didn't speak right away. Didn't need to. Her hand rested lightly on the bench between them. "I had a brother," he said finally. "He taught me." June turned to him, surprised not just by the words, but by the way his voice cracked ever so slightly. A name not spoken in years. A memory cracked open by music. "What happened to him?" she asked. Michael didn't answer. But she saw the grief behind his eyes. Old. Deep. Not yet ready to be spoken aloud. That night, she made tea. Not from the shelter supplies, but from the peppermint stash she kept hidden in her locker. They sat together on the floor of the kitchen, backs against the oven, sipping slowly. Steam curled between them like a thread. He asked about her life before the shelter. She told him, not everything, but enough. The school. The accusation. The loneliness after. He didn't judge. Just nodded, once. "People assume you're broken when bad things happen," she said, her voice low. "Like you've become something less. But sometimes, you just shift. You're still there. Just different." He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. Not less. Never less. It wasn't flirtation. It was reverence. As if, in that moment, he saw all of her, and didn't flinch. The next morning, the storm broke. Sunlight poured through the window, melting ice from the edges of the glass. Michael was already in the courtyard, broom in hand, clearing a path. June watched from inside, something warm blooming in her chest. She didn't know exactly what this was between them. But it was real. Quiet. Growing. And somewhere deep inside her, a part of her that had long stopped believing in more began to hope again. By the end of the second week, Michael wasn't just part of the shelter, he was woven into it. People looked for him. Trusted him. Even the gruff old cook, who didn't smile for anyone, started saving an extra biscuit just for him. But June noticed something. A tension in his shoulders whenever a car backfired outside. The way he scanned faces in the hallway longer than he needed to. Once, when a group of city officials came in to do a funding inspection, Michael disappeared until they left. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper, like a man who expected his peace to be temporary. Then, late one evening, as they sat in the dim glow of the break room, June spoke the words that had been pressing on her chest for days. "Who are you really, Michael?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at the mug in his hands, steam curling like secrets he was tired of hiding. "My name isn't Michael," he said finally. "It's Nathan." The name landed softly, but it changed everything. June blinked. "Nathan." He sighed. "Nathan Hale. As in Hale Tech. As in the guy who disappeared 2 months ago and left shareholders screaming." She froze. Hale Tech. She remembered the name. A private AI firm with government contracts, startup roots, and a front-page scandal. Their CEO had vanished just days before a massive buyout deal collapsed. Whispers of fraud. Embezzlement. Internal sabotage. June had assumed it was another rich man fleeing responsibility. But Nathan Hale wasn't running from guilt. He was running for his life. He looked at her then, raw and uncovered. "I didn't steal anything. I was set up. By the man I trusted most, my business partner, Derek Wills. We built the company together. But I got in his way. I wanted to scale back. Prioritize ethics, slow down production. He wanted fast profit. No matter the cost. June's breath caught. So what did he do? Nathan leaned forward. He framed me. Altered ledgers. Leaked false financial reports. Then he paid someone to take me out. The car crash. That wasn't an accident. I survived, but barely. By the time I crawled out of that wreck and found help, I knew, if I went to the press or police without proof, I'd be the villain in their story. He paused, running a hand through his hair. So I disappeared. Changed my name. Hid. Until I could figure out what to do. June's heart pounded. Everything she thought she knew, his silence, his hesitations, even the way he fixed the damn generator, it all made sense now. And the proof? She asked. There's a drive, he said. Encrypted backups, emails, recordings. I stashed it before the crash, in a cabin I used to own in the Adirondacks. I need to get it back. But I can't do it alone. She could have walked away then. Said it was too much. Too dangerous. That she didn't want to be part of someone else's battle. But she didn't. Because in the past 2 weeks, Nathan had shown her more kindness and respect than most people had in her whole life. Because his truth was heavy, and he'd finally trusted her with it. Because sometimes, when someone is brave enough to take down a giant, you want to stand beside them. So she reached for his hand. Then let's go get it. And just like that, the quiet shelter became the starting line of a war they never asked for, but were finally ready to fight. They left before dawn, taking the shelter van June signed out under the pretense of a donation run. Snow still clung to the roadsides, but the sky was clear, a cold blue stretch above them, streaked with quiet resolve. June drove, her fingers white-knuckled on the wheel. Nathan sat beside her, a faded ball cap pulled low, the weight of 2 lives pressed onto his shoulders. Neither of them spoke much on the drive, but it wasn't silence, it was preparation. The kind that settled between 2 people who knew there was no turning back. The cabin was tucked in a forested hollow 3 hours north. It used to be Nathan's retreat, before everything. Now it was a ghost of a safer time, shuttered and snow-covered, the driveway buried beneath drifts. They parked on the roadside and hiked the last stretch, breath fogging, limbs stiff. Inside, the air was dry and still. Dust coated the countertops, but the backup generator still worked. Nathan moved with purpose, lifting a loose floorboard in the corner of the living room. Beneath it, a metal lockbox. He cracked it open and pulled out a slim black drive. This is everything, he said quietly. Financial records. Internal emails. Audio logs from meetings. Even the voice memo I made the day I confronted Derek. June took the drive from him, held it for a moment. Then let's make sure they hear it. But they weren't alone. It happened fast. A low rustle outside. A shadow through the frosted glass. Nathan's instincts kicked in first, he grabbed June and pulled her to the ground just as the back door burst open. 2 men in black, faces covered. Hired muscle. Give us the drive, one growled, stepping into the room with a glint of steel in his hand. Nathan didn't flinch. Walk away, he said. You don't know what's on it. I don't care, the man snapped. But Derek does. June's pulse thundered in her ears. She reached for the fireplace poker behind her, fingers trembling. Nathan nodded once, a silent cue. She hurled it across the room, not to hit, but to distract. The man turned. Nathan moved. A struggle broke out, brutal and fast. One of the attackers lunged. Nathan blocked, twisted, shoved. June grabbed a heavy lamp and swung, knocking the second man sideways. He hit the floor, stunned. In the chaos, Nathan tackled the first one. A punch. A knee. Then the man was out cold. Silence fell again, heavy and panting. Go, Nathan said, breath ragged. Now. They fled the cabin, drive secured in June's coat, adrenaline firing in their veins. By the time they reached the van, the sun had started to fall, casting long shadows across the road like watchful ghosts. Back in the city, they didn't go to the police. Not yet. They needed leverage. Insurance. Nathan knew a reporter, one who'd once covered Hale Tech's rise. Her name was Claire. Trusted, unbought, and hard as nails. He called her. 2 hours later, they sat in a dark cafe downtown, the hum of the city pressing in around them. Claire plugged in the drive. Her eyes widened as file after file unfolded across her screen. Audio clips. Wire transfers. Spreadsheets. Names. This is enough to bury him, she whispered. And clear you. Nathan looked at June then. Her hair was tangled, her coat stained from the forest, her eyes full of fire. I didn't plan to survive that crash, he said softly. But I did. And now I know why. She smiled, tired, warm, true. Because you weren't done yet. He reached for her hand across the table, fingers lacing with hers. I think I was waiting for you. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. But inside that tiny cafe, two hearts found something louder. The sound of finally being seen. The news broke like thunder the next morning. Tech tycoon's disappearance unraveled, new evidence points to corporate sabotage. Claire's article spread like wildfire, across websites, social media, and evening news anchors' breathless voices. She didn't hold back. She published the files, the recordings, the voice memo where Nathan clearly warned his partner, Derek Wills, about unethical contracts, and the subtle threat in Derek's reply. By noon, federal agents raided Hale Tech's downtown headquarters. By sunset, Derek Wills was arrested. And by the end of the week, Nathan Hale was exonerated. But he didn't go back to the boardroom. He didn't step onto stages or take interviews. The media swarmed, of course. They wanted the prodigal CEO. The headline. The redemption arc. But Nathan didn't care about proving anything anymore. He'd already won back the only truth that mattered, his name, and someone who saw him beneath it. He found June on the shelter rooftop the night of Derek's arrest. The city shimmered below them, its lights blinking like stars that had learned to live low to the ground. She was leaning against the railing, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her breath curling into the dark. He stepped beside her. They offered me my job back, he said. She looked at him. Are you taking it? He paused. No. She didn't speak, but something in her shoulders loosened. I thought revenge would feel like a victory, he continued. But it doesn't. Not really. What feels real is this. The mornings at the shelter. The tea in cracked mugs. Folding laundry beside you. She turned to him, eyes bright. So what now? Nathan took a small velvet box from his coat pocket. No grand speech. No spotlight. Just a man who had almost died, who had found life in the quiet grace of a woman who gave everything without asking for anything back. I don't have a diamond, he said. Just this promise, that I will never disappear again. That I'll show up, every morning. That I'll choose this life. With you. Even on the hard days. June's breath caught. Because he wasn't offering her wealth. He was offering her presence. A love that stayed. A future they would build from broken things. She nodded, a tear slipping free. Yes, she whispered. That's all I ever needed. They kissed under the cold sky, not with fireworks or music swelling, but with a quiet certainty that didn't need to be louder than the world. And somewhere below, the city kept moving. But on that rooftop, two people finally stopped running. A year later, winter returned, but this time, it was different. The snow still fell thick and slow across the rooftops, and the shelter steps were still dusted white each morning. But now, there were strings of golden lights wrapped around the doorframe. The old flickering heater had been replaced, the pantry shelves fully stocked. There were children laughing down the hallway, and the smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen like a quiet kind of hope. Nathan and June now ran the shelter together. Not with grandeur or cameras. Just with a shared rhythm, him handling repairs, logistics, quiet donations from old friends who now knew the truth. June managed the volunteers, the young mothers, the freshly released from prison and the freshly broken by life. She made sure everyone who walked through the doors felt human again. They didn't need riches. They had purpose. Nathan never returned to Hale Tech. He let it go. Sold his remaining shares and used the money to quietly fund housing programs and trauma therapy for former inmates. People called him the invisible philanthropist, but that didn't matter. The only person he wanted to be seen by was the one who now slept beside him, her head curled into his chest on cold nights. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. Snow again. The kind of snow that blankets the world in stillness. June stood by the window in their tiny apartment above the shelter, holding a tray of gingerbread cookies, watching as a boy in a red coat handed out candy canes to the new arrivals below. Nathan joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin on her shoulder. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "The life before?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. I miss the piano." She smiled. "Well, lucky for you, there's one downstairs that still plays about 7 notes correctly." They laughed. It wasn't the sound of triumph. It was the sound of belonging. Later that night, they sat in the chapel room, a circle of people gathered around a tree made of scrap wood and glitter paper. No fancy ornaments. Just paper stars with handwritten wishes. June had started the tradition months ago. Write what you hoped for, then hang it. Even if it feels impossible. Nathan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. He handed it to June. She unfolded it slowly, heart fluttering. It read, "This life. This peace. You. Forever." She didn't speak. She just leaned her head on his shoulder, the flicker of candles dancing in her eyes. Outside, the city moved on, fast, loud, distracted. But inside that little shelter, time stood still. Two people who once lived in the shadows now stood in the light. Not because they chased it, but because they learned to carry it for each other. And in that warmth, others began to heal too. One night. One woman's kindness. One man's truth. And everything changed. The end.